Dinosaurs? Forget about them. The absolute largest creature in the history of our planet is swimming in our oceans right this very second. Imagine a 12-story building just gliding through the water. That's the blue whale. They clock in at an average of 79 feet long and a whopping 286,000 pounds. And the largest single specimen ever recorded was a massive 108 feet long, literally the height of a 12-story building. Actually, it's not just blue whales. From fin whales to sperm whales, the whale family tree is packed with absolute giants. Because of this, they basically have zero natural predators in the ocean. In fact, some toothed whales are straight-up apex predators. But hey, that's only in the water. Against an off-the-charts predator from above the surface, even whales didn't stand a chance. And that predator was none other than us, humans. After driving large land mammals to the brink, modern humans inevitably turned our sights to the sea, ruthlessly hunting whales for thousands of years. They were the ultimate underwater jackpot, a massive, living gold mine. Today, let's take a quick dive into the wild history of whaling. Whales are incredibly unique creatures with a truly bizarre evolutionary backstory. They might look like giant fish, but they're actually mammals, just like us. Specifically, they belong to the order Artiodactyla, which includes cows, sheep, and pigs. Because of this, their closest living land-dwelling relative is, believe it or not, the hippo. The shared ancestor of these hoofed mammals settled near the water, eventually evolving into the common ancestor of both whales and hippos. The ones that went fully aquatic became whales, while the ones that stayed amphibious became hippos. I mean, so far it's your standard marine mammal origin story. But what makes whales so special isn't just their family tree, it's their insane size. Sure, bigger bodies help retain heat, which is why most cold-water marine mammals rock a thick layer of blubber and a hefty build. But whales take it to a whole new level, boasting sizes that completely dwarf other marine mammals, the biggest elephants, and even woolly mammoths and dinosaurs. But did you know that whales only started getting this massive about 3 million years ago? The Ice Age supercharged the trade winds, which caused a massive upwelling of nutrients from the deep ocean. This created an absolute buffet for the marine food web, from tiny plankton all the way up to fish. To be precise, it wasn't the entire ocean that got richer. The food became insanely concentrated in specific spots during certain seasons, turning survival into a high-stakes game of all or nothing. Because of this, the ultimate survival cheat code was migrating vast distances to gorge on massive amounts of food in one go. So they evolved to grow larger to maximize energy storage, while leveling up their intelligence and social skills just to track down those prime feeding spots. During this process, some whales actually lost their teeth, replacing them with a weird, bristly filter called baleen. Whales with this setup are called baleen whales, while the ones that kept their chompers are toothed whales. While toothed whales are active predators that hunt larger prey just like sharks, baleen whales gulp down massive mouthfuls of water and tiny prey like krill, using their baleen to strain out the food, making them what we call filter feeders. The crazy part is that the absolute heavyweights of the whale world, like blue whales, fin whales, humpbacks, and minkies, are almost all baleen whales. In fact, the reigning champ, the blue whale, can crush nearly 5 tons, about 11,000 pounds of krill in a single day. So basically, swarms of practically invisible krill are fueling a mountain of energy. Anyway, how on earth did humans end up hunting these massive, highly intelligent, and powerful titans? Truth is, humans didn't start off hunting whales directly. Even though we were born hunters who could take down a mammoth with nothing but a spear, hunting a whale meant dealing with a massive size difference and fighting in the water. Talk about playing an extreme away game. But hey, even whales make mistakes while swimming, right? By scavenging beached whales that washed ashore, humans had already developed a taste for whale meat by at least the Paleolithic era. If you got lucky, a single whale yielded way more meat than a mammoth, instantly securing enough food for weeks, if not a whole month. And it wasn't just about the meat. Because they were so huge, you could use their bones for tools, burn their blubber for light, and weave their baleen into baskets. They were basically floating cash cows. So at a certain point, it became totally worth the risk to take the fight to the ocean. By the late Neolithic to early Bronze Age, humans officially started hunting whales directly. Since deep-sea voyages were out of the question with the tech of the time, ancient whaling usually involved baiting or driving coastal whales into shallow waters. Since whales are mammals and have to surface to breathe, teams of men in small boats could relentlessly harpoon them for a full day or even several days until they finally went down. Of course, since whales roamed every ocean on Earth, whaling popped up pretty much anywhere with a coastline. However, it was way more popular in the higher latitudes of the northern hemisphere than in the tropical equator zones. Cold water holds more nutrients and prey, so the true heavyweight whales naturally preferred the freezing waters from the mid-latitudes on up. In fact, in the Arctic regions where farming was impossible and timber was non-existent, whaling was literally a lifeline that provided food, shelter, and survival materials all in one package. That's why in Europe, whaling was concentrated along the Atlantic coast rather than the warmer Mediterranean. And the undisputed mecca of European whaling was the Bay of Biscay, nestled right between Spain and France. The locals there, the Basques, are legendary veterans when it comes to fishing. Since the early Middle Ages, they weren't just catching cod and herring, they were making some serious side cash by hunting whales that wandered into the bay. By the High Middle Ages, around the 11th century, they took it to the next level. They built watchtowers on cliffs and set up a communication network across villages, effectively turning the entire coastline into a massive whale spotting base. The second the signal hit, whale spotted, able-bodied men from around 20 different villages would drop everything, rush out to sea, surround the target, and unleash a coordinated attack to bring it down. The reason they went so hard was that European demand for whale products was absolutely exploding at the time. Specifically, the oil rendered from their ridiculously thick layer of blubber was the ultimate multi-tool. As populations boomed and commerce grew, people desperately needed fuel for lamps. On top of that, nothing beat whale oil as a waterproofing agent for ships and leather goods. By the 13th century, the wool industry was skyrocketing, which drove demand even higher because whale oil was needed to make the soap used in the processing of the wool. But ironically, unlike in other parts of the world, Europeans actually hated the taste of whale meat. It was basically relegated to a cheap meat substitute during Lent. The only exception was the tongue, which was considered a rare delicacy and sold at a premium to nobles. Classic picky European dietary habits, right? So this wasn't survival hunting to feed the village, this was purely commercial whaling designed to print money. Then, in the early 16th century, the whaling game completely changed forever. Breton fishermen who had been crossing the Atlantic to fish for cod off the coast of North America stumbled upon massive pods of whales near Newfoundland. The Bretons didn't really care since they were just there for the cod, but for the Basque whaling masters, this was basically striking oil before the gold rush. In 1517, the Basques launched the first ever deep-sea whaling expedition, officially kicking off the Great Age of Whaling. Wait, you might be asking, if they caught whales that far away, how on earth did they transport them back to Europe? The answer? Just toss the meat. At first, the Basques actually tried salting the meat and hauling the whole thing back. But since Europeans didn't even like whale meat anyway, the math just didn't make financial sense. Sailing from Europe to Newfoundland back then was a grueling, multi-month journey, just one way. It was way more profitable and easier to preserve if they just slaughtered several whales, stripped them of their blubber and baleen, and left the rest to rot. Because of this, by the mid-16th century, they actually set up permanent land bases. They built base camps near the Strait of Belle Isle between Newfoundland and Labrador, fully butchering and rendering the whales on site before shipping only the highly valuable finished products back home. They chose this spot because it was a crucial, non-negotiable migration choke point for North Atlantic whales. The whales fed in the Arctic Ocean during the summer and had to migrate down to the Gulf of St. Lawrence in the winter to give birth. By blockading this exact route, the whalers were essentially shooting fish in a barrel, resulting in a ridiculously high success rate. To be fair, up until this point, the ecosystem could still handle the pressure. The Basques were catching maybe 100 whales a year on a relatively small scale, so it wasn't critically damaging the population. However, throughout the 16th century, demand for whale oil kept surging, and baleen became highly sought after for corsets and umbrella frames. Naturally, new competitors started showing up to demand a piece of this massive, lucrative pie. When brand new, untouched whaling grounds were discovered beyond Labrador, like Svalbard in the Arctic Ocean, the Dutch and Danes in the 17th century, followed by the British in the 18th century, formed massive commercial whaling companies and started slaughtering North Atlantic whales indiscriminately. Driven by European powers, whaling evolved into a colossal, industrialized bloodbath where thousands of whales were butchered every single year. Moving into the 18th century, America entered the chat. Starting in New England, the massive hunt for the sperm whale officially kicked off. You know that giant whale with the blocky, square head from the novel Moby Dick? Yep, that's the sperm whale. First of all, sperm whales are the largest of all toothed whales, with males outsizing even a lot of baleen whales. But more importantly, the chemical makeup of their blubber was entirely different, making them insanely valuable. While baleen whales' blubber was mostly made up of standard triglycerides, pretty much like beef tallow or lard, the blubber of toothed whales, like the sperm whale, was primarily composed of wax esters. This meant it burned without smoke, soot, or that awful smell, and it remained completely stable under extreme temperature changes. And guess when this was happening? Right at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. As the world upgraded from pocket watches and wagon wheels to massive heat engines and sprawling factories, whale oil, specifically sperm whale oil, started selling out instantly as the ultimate premium lubricant for heavy machinery. But wait, it gets crazier. Aside from blubber, sperm whales hold a unique substance in their massive heads called spermaceti, and this was the real prize. Spermaceti is a type of liquid wax that hardens or melts depending on the temperature. Biologically, the whale uses it for deep diving, head-butting rivals, or amplifying its sonar range. Unlike regular whale oil that had to be boiled down, spermaceti could just be scooped out as a liquid. It had low viscosity, didn't go rancid, burned smokeless, and withstood high heat. It was, without exaggeration, the highest quality oil mankind could get its hands on at the time. When cooled into a solid, it was called spermaceti wax, used for luxury candles and high-end cosmetics for the elite. When refined as a liquid, it became the gold standard lubricant, keeping the most critical gears of the Industrial Revolution turning. The tricky part was that sperm whales are deep divers that exclusively hang out in the middle of the open ocean. So, unlike the old method of camping out at coastal choke points and ambushing them, whalers now had to sail deep into uncharted waters to actively hunt them down. Since they were so far away from any coastline, returning to a land base to process a kill every single time was physically impossible, right? Because of this, the entire paradigm shifted. They just crammed the entire processing facility onto a massive sailing ship and started boiling the blubber right there on the open water. This breakthrough allowed the whaling industry to finally break out of the Atlantic in the 19th century, expanding their hunting grounds into the Indian and Pacific Oceans. And naturally, to squeeze maximum profit out of every voyage, their hunting tactics and gear kept evolving too. By the mid to late 19th century, technological leaps completely changed the game, introducing steam-powered ships and explosive harpoons fired from cannons. For the first time, humans could actually outrun a whale. This meant that the ultra-massive baleen whales that were previously too fast and too big to hunt, like the mighty blue whale, were suddenly on the menu. In the late 19th century, Norwegians invented harpoons with explosive warheads that detonated inside the whale, alongside air compressors to pump the carcass full of air so it wouldn't sink. At this point, whaling wasn't hunting anymore. If a whale was spotted, it was an instant one-shot, one-kill. It became a literal oceanic massacre. Then, in the early 20th century, the ultimate endgame vehicle was introduced, the factory ship. It was an absolutely perfect, self-contained industrial system, where a whale was dragged on board and fully processed into finished oil right on the spot. Because these ships could stay out at sea for years on end, constantly hunting and butchering, the southern ocean surrounding Antarctica emerged as the new epicenter of global whaling in the 20th century. The brutal reality was that they had to go all the way to Antarctica because whale populations in every other ocean had plummeted so hard that just spotting one was becoming rare. But thanks to advanced radar and tech, they were relentlessly tracking them down, meaning the total number of kills was actually increasing. In fact, in the early 1900s, global kills hovered around 2,000 whales a year. Within a single decade, that skyrocketed to 20,000. This terrifying trend continued into the 60s and 70s, peaking at nearly 80,000 whales slaughtered annually. The industry had completely spiraled out of control. To be fair, the International Whaling Commission, IWC, was formed as early as 1946 to prevent this exact crisis, and by 1948 they introduced hunting quotas by country and species. But due to wildly inaccurate population estimates and massive institutional loopholes, it did absolutely nothing to protect the whales. However, by the 1970s, a wave of non-whaling nations joined the IWC, and a massive global environmental movement ignited a fierce public backlash against whaling. Ultimately, in 1982, the IWC officially voted to implement a total ban on commercial whaling. When the moratorium went into effect in 1986, it essentially brought the great age of whaling to a close. But hold on, there are some major exceptions to this rule, meaning that there are still countries out there hunting whales right now. For example, Arctic indigenous groups like the Inuit in Alaska and Canada have hunted whales for centuries. Because it's intrinsically tied to their survival and culture, they are granted strict quotas under the Aboriginal subsistence whaling exception. Under this rule, indigenous communities in Canada, Russia, and the US legally harvest about 300 to 400 whales per year. Also, if a member nation fundamentally disagrees with the ban, they can just formally file an objection. Because the IWC has literally zero enforcement power, a country can basically just say, "I object and I'm gonna do whatever I want," and that's that. In fact, the moment the ban was announced, one country immediately filed an objection and has never retracted it: Norway. Norway remains one of the world's biggest whaling nations, continuing to hunt around 500 whales every single year. Despite the US and European nations applying intense pressure and aggressively telling them to stop for 40 years, Norway hasn't blinked once. Finally, there are the countries that simply exploited legal loopholes to keep their harpoons firing. The prime offenders here were Iceland and Japan. They took advantage of another convenient IWC exception, the scientific whaling provision. Their argument was that to study whale ecology and check if populations were recovering, they had no choice but to harvest a few whales in the name of science. But let's be real, calling it a small scientific sample was a massive stretch. Japan was killing close to 800 to 1,000 whales a year, maintaining a full-blown commercial operation for decades. Worse, all the meat and byproducts from this research were legally funneled straight into commercial markets, proving it was basically just a giant transparent smoke and mirrors operation. When the US and other nations relentlessly called them out on this blatantly rigged system, Japan finally just rage quit the IWC entirely in 2019. In just one century, from 1900 to 1999, a staggering 2.9 million whales were wiped out. That includes 870,000 fin whales and 760,000 sperm whales alone. When you ruthlessly overhunt a long-living apex predator like that, a total population collapse isn't just a risk, it's an absolute certainty. The numbers are grim. Blue whales lost 98.5% of their pre-whaling population, leaving only around 5,000 alive. And the North Atlantic right whale was pushed to the absolute brink of extinction with merely 350 individuals left. And for some species, like the Atlantic gray whale, it's already game over. They are officially declared extinct. So with all this damage done, why on earth are people still hunting whales today? The reality is, in the modern world, whale products are practically useless. The moment the first commercial oil well struck black gold in Pennsylvania in 1859, petroleum and synthetic plastics completely replaced whale oil and baleen forever. All that's left is the meat, but there are barely any places on Earth where people actually still eat it. Aside from Arctic indigenous groups, it's pretty much just the Faroe Islands and Japan. And even in Japan, the younger generation rarely ever touches whale meat. Yet the harpoons keep firing. No matter how you slice it, it just doesn't make any sense. But hey, we're gonna dive deeper into this madness in future shorts and full-length videos, so make sure you stick around and check those out when they drop. Now look, it took whales millions of years to become the biggest things on Earth, but frankly, I don't have that kind of time. I'm trying to grow this channel to blue whale proportions, and step one is conquering the 10,000 subscriber ocean. If each of you could toss me a single krill by hitting that subscribe button, I might actually stand a chance at surviving in this YouTube ecosystem. Don't leave me stranded on the beach like a lonely hippo. Help me dive deep into the 10K club. This has been Flat Archive. Thanks for watching.